So one of the things to consider is at different points in time, events outside the everyday events may occur within local communities for children and families that are attending different centres. And at those points you're thinking, what impact is this going to have on the children attending our centre? And what we know is that some children will be absolutely fine, they're naturally resilient, and there'll be other children who are less naturally resilient. We also know that some children will have very stable home lives, which will help at these times, and there'll be other children whose home lives may be less stable. And we know that then there'll be certain children who we need to look out for because they're going to be more impacted. One of the questions in a lot of people's minds will be, will natural disasters affect children's behaviour? And we know that they will affect some children and not others. So some children will continue their daily life relatively untouched by things that are happening around them, whereas other children may be more severely impacted. Things we may look for in their behaviour would be major changes. One of the things to think about with children is that they process the world differently from adults. And if we're thinking of younger children in particular, when there's events outside of their lives that are distressing, they don't have the same capacity as adults. One important thing to think about is that for a child, whatever is happening right now is reality. They can't take that longer lens view and think, okay, that this event's happened, but it hasn't always happened and it won't be happening in the future. This is their life. So what we know from lots of research, as well as working with children and families throughout the world, is that some children will be more affected than other children. And sometimes that can be due to the characteristics of the child. Some children are naturally more anxious. Sometimes it's also about the characteristics of their home life, their community. They may have had various changes occur in their family life that will have an effect that if they're experiencing other changes in their life, they're going to find it harder. We know that it's an accumulation of these sorts of risk factors that causes the most difficulty, no matter what child. All children can be affected if they've had an accumulation of different distressing events happen in their life. And change for a child can be a distressing event. So, as we'd expect, when a child experiences something distressing, they're going to look to the grown-ups to try and help restore that sense of safety and security and that sort of path back to the world feeling okay again. And so what we'd expect to be looking for would be signs of anxiety. They're going to be perhaps asking lots of questions. Is everything okay? Are people okay? They are going to find it hard to settle at night time. So normal routines, daily routines, there may be difficulties with some of those routines, and yet we know that one of the things we need to do is to try and help restore those daily routines after some sort of event like this has happened. There will be other behaviours such as nail biting or wetting that could start to reoccur after some sort of distressing event for a child. And really importantly, what we know is that a child will do as well as the grown-ups around them. So that's people in their family, but also people they come into contact with, including at preschools and other daycare centres. So we know that it's really important for us to be trying to convey to children a positive message of that the world is okay and safe and that things will be all right again.
Young children might be particularly vulnerable to natural disasters for a number of reasons. And the first is that young children are particularly dependent on adults. So they're at risk both in terms of the exposure to the natural disaster, but also the impact that the natural disasters have on their parents and their primary caregivers. So we see disruptions in relationships, and also we see a reduction in parents' ability to parent effectively and to be emotionally available for children. We also see children, particularly young children, as being vulnerable because they don't have the same level of understanding that adults do. So the way that they process an event is very much tied to their developmental capacity and understanding. And we also know young children have less coping skills to draw on to deal with these kind of crises. The other part why we see children to be particularly vulnerable is because they have very limited understanding or limited causality. So what we'll find is they have false assumptions or false expectations. So it's not unusual for children to believe that they might be somehow responsible for evacuation, or in some way that they have this understanding that the whole of Australia is on fire. So we see this really generalised fear, which can enhance their level of vulnerability.
I don't think we really understood how the bushfire would affect our kids after the event. I hadn't had any experience with that kind of thing before, or bushfires or any kind of natural disaster. I was really interested that trauma can play out in many different ways, and I think that what we've learned since then is that trauma doesn't necessarily have to be crying or just separation distress, but it can come out in other behaviours, such as a lot of controlling behaviour, looking defiant, looking we've seen a lot of inattention and impulsivity, a lot of hyperactivity and hyperarousal, really, like children who are hyperaroused. It's been really interesting, and I think that that's where our interest in learning how to support children who are showing these types of behaviour, how to bring them back to learning brain, to bring them back to a place where they're ready to learn and engage and concentrate for extended periods of time.
When the children started coming back after we reopened after the fire, I think initially what we saw was a lot of separation anxiety. That's sort of a lot of what I remember. And particularly what stood out for me was children who were very confident little people, and we had known for quite some time here and were very familiar to us into preschool. And we were noticing that they were becoming quite distressed on separating from their parents. And it soon, I think that was quite alarming for us, for those children. And then we also saw, we then sort of as time went by, seeing behaviours, controlling behaviours, we've seen a lot of that.
Impulsivity.
Impulsivity, some defiance,
So the things that we've found really surprising as a result of maybe the experience of the fires is that we've seen a lot more kind of inattention, controlling and impulsive behaviours, which we're now seeing that it's a result of feeling a bit more hyper-aroused. And I guess it's been really interesting to us about how we deal with those behaviours. They're not what you would typically see. Like, it's not the kind of thing that you would, that's because of the fire. But certainly we're starting to link the two. We've seen a lot more of that kind of stuff since the fire.
Definitely. So with the controlling behaviours, what we're finding since the fires is children particularly sort of appearing to need to control their environment. So whether that's by not wanting to join us, maybe through group times, or not wanting to participate in things.
Having particular seats that they want to sit in, or particular clothes that they want to wear, or it's those kind of things, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it
definitely.
Looks like defiance.
It does look like defiance.
Looks
and
like
I think
defiance.
initially that's what we were sort of feeling.